Well, thank you, Joel, and it's a real honor to be here. I've been on the road quite a bit. I've been 4 or 5 cities in the last 10 or 12 days, I think. I look forward to going home tomorrow morning, and we'll be home 2 days, and then Sunday fly out to Armenia to speak there as they commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Holocaust in their country. So it's very busy times, but it's a real attraction for me to go back because I not only have my wife and children to go back to, but now 4 grandchildren to go back to. But I always remember the caution of a corporal who once said to Winston Churchill, "I have never told you about my grandchildren, have I?" He said, "No, and I want you to know how much I appreciate it." So I shall not bore you with any of that. I was just thinking of the challenge tonight. I used to be in the world of culinary arts. That's just a nice way of saying I was in the catering industry. And we used to tell people that if you're eating a nice meal and listening to nice music at the same time, you're insulting both the chef and the musician. But we have just accomplished that. The delicious meal, great music. Now we are going to do the impossible. And that is for me to have to speak to you on a full stomach. Chesterton said, everybody's worldview changes 30 minutes after a meal. And so while your worldview is changing, I don't know whether I'll be able to straddle those lines or what. But in all seriousness, thank you, musicians. I was giving you a hearing, and I appreciate it, as the others were too. And I know the meal was splendid. At least the dessert sitting in front of me looks delicious. But when I speak, I have to express extreme discipline. But that's not a problem. I need to as an itinerant. The challenges that we face in our time, incredible challenges. Joel is right. I've crisscrossed the globe now for 4 decades. And I've watched this world change, especially the West. He used to say the East is the East and the West is the West, and the twain shall never meet. My goodness, have they ever met? And do we now have a changing world? And when I moved to Canada, I was 20, lived in Toronto for about 10 or 11 years, and the Lord changed my life and my studies. And today what I'm doing is nothing what I ever anticipated I'd be doing with my life. But just watching over the last 20, 30 years, beginning from the 60s and the Cultural Revolution, and all that was taking place, and the upheaval of our values. Chesterton used to say, whenever you remove any fence, always pause long enough to ask why it was put there in the first place. We don't ask that anymore. We're rewriting everything, removing fences, and we think we can do that with impunity. The 2 great challenges that we face in our time. The first is the challenge of the intellect. And as we face that intellectual challenge, we seem to be hearing from the sciences and the philosophy departments, how daunting it is now to actually believe in God. The Richard Dawkins of this world have done their havoc and continue to challenge everything that is sacred, and to a point of even mocking belief in God. Some of his statements are totally atrocious. When I think that an intellectual could have such disregard for the faith of billions of people, but so it is. This hubris, this verbosity, the idea that we can sound thoroughly intellectual because now with the scientific single vision, we can pull down everything metaphysical. I was stunned to see Stephen Hawking's statement in his book, The Grand Design, when on page 5 he says, philosophy is dead. My goodness. My goodness. Theologians didn't have to battle out against that book. The philosophy department rose up to it at Cambridge. And I studied under that department then. The chairman of the department made the comment when he said, maybe it's about time that the oracular Professor Hawking realizes he has not kept up as much with our discipline as we have with his. And this kind of challenge that we face is significant. David Berlinski, a skeptic, responding to Dawkins as the God delusion, wrote The Devil's Delusion. Now here is Berlinski, a total skeptic, But listen to what he says in his book, just in the flap of the book cover there. Has anyone provided a proof of God's inexistence? Not even close. Has quantum cosmology explained the emergence of the universe or why it is here? Not even close. Have the sciences explained why our universe seems to be fine-tuned to allow for the existence of life? Not even close. Are physicists and biologists willing to believe in anything so long as it is not religious thought? Close enough. Has rationalism and moral thought provided us with an understanding of what is good, what is right, and what is moral? Not close enough. Has secularism in the terrible 20th century been a force for good? Not even close to being close. Is there a narrow and oppressive orthodoxy of thought and opinion within the sciences? Close enough. Does anything in the sciences or in their philosophy justify the claim that religious belief is irrational? Is scientific atheism a frivolous exercise in intellectual contempt? Dead on. Now, when the scientists themselves are cautioning other scientists and reminding them of the epistemological track on which they are, how they arrive at truth, how they glean knowledge, not to make that cardinal blunder of expelling all other disciplines, for after all, the very purpose of a university is to find unity in diversity. You take all of the disciplines and find a confluence of how you arrive at truth within these, ultimately to form your worldview and your own metaphysical framework. So we face the attack of the intellectual, incredible attack, though. People like Dawkins and Dennett and so many of the likes of the Harris from this side, they just write in such a prolific way, challenging what we believe. But then there's also the religious challenge. The religious challenge that comes from worldviews of a counter perspective to the perspective that framed this nation. I want you to think very carefully of the statement that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we're all created equal and endowed by the Creator with inalienable rights for the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. Here's what I want to ask you. Do you know of any other worldview that would have generated that statement other than the Judeo-Christian worldview? I challenge you, there isn't. It would not have come from pantheism. It would not have come from the other monotheistic religions. Impossible to have come from that. Certainly it could not have come from naturalism. So the framing ideas that gave us the ethical foundation on which to pursue life, liberty, and personal fulfillment and happiness was framed because there was a belief that there are some truths that are indeed self-evident. And we have lost even the place of natural law. So that's the headwind we face intellectually. But there's also the headwind of cultural disorientation. I had the privilege, one of the greatest privileges of my life was to spend an afternoon with Malcolm Muggeridge. He was my great hero. I don't know of any journalist with a possible toss-up between him and Chesterton could be branded the greatest journalist of that 20th century. Our own Fred Barnes, I remember talking to him once, asking him how he found his way to Jesus Christ, and he said it was two journalists who were visiting their home here in the United States, and when they left, his wife said to him something very unique about those men, phoned them and asked them what makes them tick. And when he wrote and asked them, they sent him a copy of Muggeridge's Jesus Rediscovered. Hardly an orthodox book in theology, but certainly the finding of Christ in the pursuit of that man. I spent that afternoon with him, talked to him. He was going to be writing the introduction to my first book, passed away before that year was over in 1990. I talked to him about the time he left Edinburgh University as a chaplain, and he told me what all had happened. Here's a paragraph from his farewell address. So, dear Edinburgh students, this may well be the last time I address you, and this is what I want to say. And I don't really care whether it means anything to you or not, and whether you think there is anything in it or not. I want you to believe that this row I have had with your elected officials has nothing to do with my puritanical attitudes on my part. I have no belief in abstinence for abstinence's own sake. No wish under any circumstances to check any fulfillment of your life and being. But I have to say to you this, that whatever life is or is not about, it is not to be expressed in terms of drug stupefaction and casual sexual relations. However else we may venture into the unknown, it is not, I assure you, on the plastic wings of Playboy magazine or psychedelic fancies. Powerful closing statement, because what was being debated at the campus at that time, I won't go into it, but it had to do with this very issue that he addressed in these terms. Intellectual attack, cultural disorientation, fences coming down. How do we stand in the gap? There was a man in the mid-400s before Christ. His name was Nehemiah. He was a civil engineer. He wasn't a theologian. He was a civil engineer. And he was working in the king's palace. And the irony of it all is he was a man of such trustworthiness that this man who had enslaved Nehemiah's people brought Nehemiah to be the cupbearer so that Nehemiah would be the last person to taste the food before giving it to the king. That was the character of Nehemiah. Just this week, we've had a leading CEO of a company who went on record as saying when he was asked, he had taken the company from 44 billion to 500 billion or something like that. What is the most important thing you look for in employees? He said, truth and trustworthiness. We want truth and trustworthiness. Nehemiah was that kind of man. If he gave you his word, the king took him at his word. And so the king looks at him one day and says, you're looking terribly despondent. What's going on? He said, King, the reason I've been looking like this for the last 4 months is my brother came from Jerusalem, and I asked him a question. How is the city of my fathers? And my brother said, you're going to be sorry you asked. The city lies in ruins. The walls are broken down. We are being attacked from all sides. We have nothing to protect us anymore. And he said, from the day my brother left, I've not been able to sleep properly, King. My heart is broken because of my beloved city of Jerusalem. That city that was so in the veins of its prophets, that Jesus himself that said, I have graven you upon the palms of my hands, God said of that city. It'd be like Washington to us here. All the history, all the markings of what God has done and accomplished. And if its walls were in ruins and broken down, and the city was desolate, and you were in a faraway land, and somebody said to you, what's keeping you down? I was in Bangkok, Thailand, when 9/11 hit. Because I make friends with all of them in the hotel, the receptionist phoned me and said, Mrs. Zacharias, have you watched the news? I said, no. She said, I think you should turn it on. Your country is being bombed. I thought, what is she talking about? And I looked at my cell phone and noticed there were numerous calls through the night, but they would just ring and then I wouldn't hear it. It was my children, my wife, trying to get a hold of me, telling me what had just happened. And as I watched that, you all can remember where you were. And watching this horrific sight, we'll never forget it. Never forget it. We are not aware how deeply the moral structures are collapsing before our eyes. The smoke of that may not be visible, but the entailments of what is happening is huge. Huge. Where we are redefining everything without having a definition for the definer. What does it mean to be human? We have no answer for that, but we are listening to humanistic definitions. If the definer is undefined, then the definer and the definitions will one day be sucked into the vortex of a quicksand. Nothing left standing. It's serious with all that I've mentioned to you. So I look at Nehemiah and I ask myself, what do I do, Lord? When God wants to drill a man and thrill a man and skill a man, when God wants to mold a man to play the noblest part, when he yearns with all his heart to create so great and bold a man that all the world might be amazed, watch his methods, watch his ways. how he ruthlessly perfects whom he royally elects, how he hammers and hurts him, and with mighty blows converts him into trial shapes of clay that only God understands, while his tortured heart is crying and he lifts beseeching hands, how he bends but never breaks when his good he undertakes, how he uses whom he chooses, and with mighty acts induces him to try his splendor out. God knows what he's about. God's molding, shaping men and women like you. That's what C.S. Lewis Institute is all about. Molding, shaping, presenting people into the arena of life with the ability to deal with the hard and the soft questions, and to so live with argument and story that it draws in the mind and the heart of the listener till they say, "What must I do to be saved? Where do I go?" Nehemiah took these steps. I don't have time to go into all of it. I'll just keep going till my time runs out. Number one, he felt a pathos for his people. He felt a pathos for his people. You will never lighten any load until you feel the pressure in your own soul. You will never lighten any load until you feel the pressure in your own soul. Years ago, the city of New York was stunned by an event that had happened in the previous night that nobody was prepared for. I won't go into it. But the councilman in the borough where it happened was obviously being questioned a lot. And finally he spoke up. He said, "What are you asking me? Are you asking me how so much can go wrong in one life, one of the constituents out of the large number I have, and that I not be aware of it? Is that what you're asking me?" He said, "You see, I am so buried with work. Sometimes I don't even have the time to listen to the cries of my own family. And you're asking me to listen. Why I didn't hear the cry of a stranger to whom this happened? If you want me to do that, you may as well ask me to listen to the sound of every blade of grass growing and the heartbeat of every squirrel. The noise would be deafening on the other side of silence." I'll never forget that statement. The heartbeat of every squirrel and the sound of every blade of grass growing, the noise will be deafening on the other side of silence. He's right. There's nobody here who can bear the aggregate of human suffering. There's only one place, and that's in the heart of God. And God takes that aggregate and breaks it down into bearable size portions, gives some of it to you and some of it to me. I'm asking you, have you sought him for the burden he wants you to carry? You can't carry it all, but you will lighten some load, and the only load you will lighten is that which burdens your heart. People ask me, do you really enjoy the task of apologetics? I'd be dishonest if I said I did. I know it sounds very spiritual to say it's wonderful. No, I'm not a masochist. I don't want to be standing in front of audiences where I know some of them are desperately hoping I can be tripped up, or fall on my face, or misquote, or be taken to task. But it's my calling. It's my calling. A few days ago, I was in Ottawa to speak at the Parliamentary Prayer Breakfast, the 50th anniversary, and the previous night, the testimony is given by Dr. Kent Brantley, who contracted Ebola and was emergency airlifted and brought to Emory. And there he stood as a physician in soft tones, telling his story. It was riveting, absolutely riveting. And his entire talk was, it was my calling to be there. It is your calling and mine that we are looking for. Bear the pathos for your people. I carry that for this country now that has given me a home and given me more than I could have ever repaid. Between the twin countries of the United States and Canada, I owe so much. I can never repay them. And my land of my birth, India, and so I go back there several times every year. They helped shape me. But what did he do? He felt the priority of his mission in prayer. 11 times in 13 chapters he said, so I prayed to the Lord of heaven, so I prayed to the Lord of heaven, so I prayed to the Lord of heaven. And I can tell you this much. If you want to know where your spiritual life is, ask yourself the question, what your prayer life is like. You see, this can become a show window. I'm in front of people. But when the door is shut and I'm on my knees. There's nothing showy about it then. It's me alone with my Maker and speaking my heart and confessing my sin and seeking His will and His glory. Prayer is so critical. What was it Robert Browning said? When I see children ride a horse, I find it in my heart to embarrass them and tell them their sticks are more coarse and they really are carrying what they say carries them. When I see children ride a horse, I find it in my heart to embarrass them and tell them their sticks are more coarse. They really are carrying what they say carries them. See, if you're a praying Christian, your faith in God will carry you. If you're not a praying Christian, you will be carrying your faith and you'll get exhausted bearing the infinite. These battles are won on our knees day by day by day. And I want to challenge you, never let the day begin for you without those moments alone with God, because the news out there can just drag you down. It can just drag you down, but get your heart so conditioned. Prayer does three things. Number one, it helps you to see your own heart, so that before we even start judging the world, we start judging ourselves and seeing how frail and how weak and how wicked we are. Jacob, when he's praying before God and asking for forgiveness, of all the questions God could have asked him, he said, "What is your name?" As if God didn't know that. Jacob's stunned. Why do you think God asked him that? Because when he stole the blessing from his father, who was blind, he pretended to be somebody he was not. He claimed to be Esau then. Now he's before an all-seeing God. God says, "Who are you?" He says, "You got me. My name's Jacob." He says, "Because you've admitted who you are, I will make a great nation out of you." Greatness is always preceded by humility of heart and a confession before God. Prayer helps you to see your own heart. Secondly, prayer will always recognize the sovereignty of God, that God is sovereign. And it is critical we always remember that. He doesn't begin a day by saying, "My word, I wasn't expecting this." He's weaving a pattern, and a grand pattern. When I applied to the Indian Air Force, I placed number 3 out of 300. They were only going to select 10. I phoned home and told my mom and dad, "I'm in." Number 3. I'd done well in all of the testing, endurance, physical, this, that, and all. Then I went and saw this Churchillian-looking wing commander who was interviewing me. Huge guy. And he looks at me and asks me a lot of questions, and then he leans forward and says, "Beta," that's Hindi for son, "you're a nice young man. I am going to reject you." And what? I said, "You're going to reject me, sir?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Can you tell me why?" He said, "This job is about killing, and you are psychologically not equipped to kill." For just a split second, I wondered if I should prove him wrong right then and there. No. I may not have all the knowledge in the world, but I'm not a fool. One look at his size and I knew who'd be left standing at the end of it, But no. When I walked out of there, I said, "What on earth has just happened?" I got on the train heading back to Delhi, and there were my parents and friends with garlands to congratulate me. If I had been accepted into the Indian Air Force, I would have had a minimum of 20 plus years committed. But that following year, my father moved us to Canada. And 2 years after that, I was in theological training and philosophy. And the rest is God's grand design. He slammed the door. He shut the door. God is sovereign over individuals and over nations. He's sovereign over our nation. But the third thing is this: He helps you become what He wants you to become when you're in prayer. C.S. Lewis, "They tell me, Lord, that when I pray only one voice is heard, that I'm dreaming. You're not there. This whole thing is absurd. Maybe they're right, Lord. Maybe they're right. When I pray, there is only one voice that's heard. But if there's only one voice, it's not mine. It's yours. I'm not dreaming. You're the dreamer, and I am your dream." You become the dream of God. God shapes and molds you to his will when you are a praying person. Pathos for his people, priority by prayer, thirdly and quickly pondered in proximity. He got close. He went close to the broken walls. We must get close to the issues. Those of you who serve in politics, I thank God for you. Yours is the most unenviable calling of our time. Those of you who are in the academia, thank you for being there, serving Christ. Those of you in law, those in the armed forces, those of you in business, those of you being home, taking care of your kids because you want to raise them up in a worldview and a thinking that'll help them get a future. Those of you who are engineers, where you're a witness in the marketplace, professional sports, whatever, we need to get close to those who need to hear the truth articulated verbally and embodied in life. Get close. My daughter Naomi, she used to work in the Bush White House. And while she was there, I opened a ministry called Wellspring International to rescue women and children from the sex trafficking industry. I'd seen so much of that stuff in so many parts of the world, and I gave her a call. I said, honey, I want to talk to you. Would you consider leading something like this? Because she always had a tender heart. When she graduated from Wheaton, she went straight to the Dominican Republic and worked with orphans. Then went and worked at Coca-Cola and was then in the White House working there. She said, Dad, this is where I am now. I said, if that's where God wants you, so be it. But if God lays on your heart the needy kids and the victims of this world, so be it. She prayed about it. She said, I want to be in that part of the world. I want to get close. She'll go into Holland with a purse and a Bible in her bag with somebody there who works in the red light district. She'll go into those little booths where the light will be turned off for her to be in there. She'd talk to them, minister to them. I have one of my colleagues here who worked in Thailand working with the same Wellspring International, doing the same thing in those parts of the world. Getting close, getting close. You must ponder in proximity. Fourthly, I'll just say this. There's a process of preparation. We must pay our dues. This day is a day you can't set a tepid Christianity beside a scorching paganism. We need to be well-armed, well-instructed, well-taught. Go all the way in your education. Study. Those of you who are going to be fellows, do it well. God may open further doors and further doors so that all the credentials he gives to you would be like the Apostle Paul, who said, I count all this but loss so that I can gain the excellency of the knowledge of Jesus Christ. But it is your passport to be heard by others. Process of preparation. And then I say to you, he avoided the paralysis of pessimism. Don't lose heart. The last chapter is not written yet. I just give you this illustration, and then I'll close. I had a Chinese business tycoon who was attending a conference that I was speaking at in a place where a survivor episode had been taped. I didn't know how I ended up there with a broken back and in this place. So this guy looks at me and says, so you're the speaker? I said, I'm going to try. He said, you better be good. He said, because I don't believe any of this stuff. I thought, boy, this is quite the welcome. I said, why are you here? He said, my wife. My wife said, have I ever asked you for a week? Men, the highest compliment we pay is that to ourselves, is that we choose people better than ourselves to be married to us. And so he said, my wife said, have I ever asked you for a week of your time? He said, no. He said, please give it to me. I want you to come to this conference. I said, Mark, you don't have to stay through the meetings. The messages are boring. You can get up and walk away. You didn't promise me the week. You promised it to her. Enjoy the week with her and the boys and so on. He came the first day, second day, third day, fourth day. His son comes forward and gives his life to Christ. He calls me. He said, what's happened to my son? I said, what did he say has happened to him? He said, he's committed his life to Christ. I said, what do you think? He said, he looks different. I said, that's only the beginning. What more is going to happen? This man's life was so transformed. So dramatically transformed. He's become one of my closest friends. He flew me to Beijing to meet one of the leading officials in China. I won't name the position. Surrounded by military brass. And he said, I want my friend Ravi to tell you what he spoke for a week out there, and I want you to listen. At the end of it, it was so amazing that this person said to me, I have never heard anybody pray in my life until you prayed at dinner. And what shocked me is that you first prayed for the servants. So much for a classless society. Had the privilege of praying with this individual. And this particular individual in politics was shocked to find out that the fastest growing church in the world today is in China. Mao Zedong thought he was done with it, buried, never to return again. It's the fastest growing church in the world. And China is going to take the gospel to the rest of the world. Don't be paralyzed by pessimism. The last chapter is not written yet. Our story is not over yet. I see young men and women all over the United States. They're going to make a difference. They will backpack around the world. They will carry that gospel in their heart. They are brave and they are bold and they will carry that message. And that's why people like you are being prepared out here. But lastly, I just want to say to you, he brought peace for his people. Built the wall in a handful of days. You can go to Israel today and see portions of that wall still standing. You see, leadership had destroyed it. The untamed passions of a gifted man, Solomon. Wanton power in a weak man, Rehoboam. The unteachable temperament of a privileged man, Jeroboam. They brought the nation down. Then came the Nehemiahs, the Ezras, and one by one, they turned the hearts of the people back to God, till Daniel had come on the scene, and 3 kings in a row crossed over from their side over to his. Don't lose heart. God will one day bring peace for his people when we who are called by his name will humble ourselves and pray and turn from our wicked ways. He will also heal our land. In 1939, the world was a mess, and the stuttering King George VI, took to the microphone and preached and spoke one of the most powerful messages, and the most memorable lines were these: I said to the man at the gate of the year, give me a light that I may walk safely into the unknown. And he said to me, go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. It shall be to you better than the light and safer than the known. I said to the man at the gate of the year, give me a light that I may walk safely into the unknown. He said, go out into the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God, and it shall be to you better than the light and safer than the known. The best way to put your hand into the hand of God is to let his word dwell in your heart and take it in to become a fire within your bones. His truth will enter your very being and be your guide and be your light. Then you stand in the gap and make a difference for a world that needs men and women like you who are here. I am honored to be with you, and I want to thank you for this privilege, and I want to thank you for supporting a work like this. Without people like you, it could never go on. I know I'm part of a ministry myself, and I know how important it is for those who gather around us to stand with us and lighten that burden that otherwise becomes more weighty. So thank you for doing what you're doing. They will be the better for it, and this nation and the world will be a better place because of our mutual sacrifice. God bless you. Thank you so much.